Welcome to Debt Matters. Usually when you hear about household debt, your mind likely jumps straight to the usual suspects, like a maxed out credit card or a high-interest personal loan, or maybe the looming stress of missing a mortgage payment.
Yeah, we've really been conditioned to view debt through that lens of consumer credit. The mechanics, borrowing money to buy a car, funding a holiday, or overextending on retail purchases. It's almost always framed as a discretionary financial transaction gone awry.
Right. But our mission today is connecting the dots on a completely different kind of financial pressure. We're looking at a whole stack of recent research and fresh data to unpack essential utility bills.
Which is such a vital topic for you to understand right now.
Exactly. We need to figure out why arrears from energy, water, and broadband have quietly ballooned to over £7 billion in the UK. And crucially, we're unpacking why traditional debt collection strategies are just, well, completely failing to solve it.
That £7 billion figure is really vital to grasp because, this is not a sudden crisis caused by a singular event. It's a steady structural alteration in how people owe money. And it fundamentally changes the relationship between the creditor and the debtor.
Let's get straight into the National Audit Office data because it paints a pretty stark picture. Energy debt alone has climbed by 118% since 2021. It has more than doubled.
Oh, yeah, it's massive.
Right. And I want to push back on the idea that this is just some behavioral issue. Because if you look at how this debt accumulates, it behaves entirely differently than standard consumer spending.
The mechanics are entirely separate, yeah. When you take out a credit card, you are making an active, conscious choice to borrow funds. Your credit limit is based on a risk model, right? One that predicts your ability to repay that specific discretionary choice. But utility debt accumulates passively. You're being billed continuously just for basic human survival needs. And, well, there is no upfront affordability check for Winker.
That is the core of it, right there. If you can't afford a streaming service, you cancel it, and you lose your movies. You might be annoyed, sure, but your life goes on.
Exactly.
But if you can't afford water, you can't just, cancel hygiene. You can't just stop needing to heat your home in January or turn off the basic internet access you need to apply for jobs.
Or do your kids' homework.
Right. So the baseline requirements for participating in modern society are just non-negotiable.
You cannot opt out of running water. So when people fall behind, they aren't defaulting on a luxury. They are falling behind on their very existence. The debt is generated just by breathing in your own home.
Which brings up a question I have about the entire concept of defaulting here. Usually the standard narrative of personal financial responsibility is, if you can't afford it, don't buy it.
Right, that's the classic line.
But when the debt is attached to biological necessities and modern survival, does the whole concept of defaulting change entirely?
It absolutely has to. The traditional debt collection model assumes that a default is a behavioral choice. It assumes the customer needs, like a firm reminder, a penalty fee, or the threat of enforcement to prioritize the payment over something else.
Like they just forgot to pay.
Exactly. But when a customer defaults on their winter heating bill, it is rarely a behavioral choice. It's a mathematical impossibility. They simply do not have the funds. So applying a punitive collection strategy to a mathematical deficit doesn't magically produce money.
It just produces distress.
Distress and complete alienation, yeah.
Which brings up a glaring issue in the data. There's actually help out there, but a massive portion of the public has no idea. The numbers show that only about a third of eligible broadband customers even know that social tariffs exist.
Yeah, the visibility gap is huge.
And for water customers who are struggling to pay, it's just 39%.
A social tariff is essentially a heavily discounted rate designed specifically for people on low incomes or receiving certain government benefits. It's a structural safety net built right into the pricing model.
Okay, but a safety net provides zero utility if the people falling don't know it's there to catch them.
Spot on.
So let me stop you right there. If these social tariffs exist, why are they such a secret? Are we looking at a failure of marketing from these companies, or is the system intentionally relying on customers to do the heavy lifting of finding the help themselves, to protect profit margins?
It's easy to assume it's a malicious conspiracy to protect margins, but it's really much more about archaic data silos and the regulatory hurdles around privacy.
Oh, like GDPR and things like that.
Exactly. To put someone on a social tariff, the utility company needs proof of eligibility, usually confirmation that the customer receives universal credit or a similar benefit. But because of strict data protection laws, the Department for Work and Pensions cannot just hand over a master list of vulnerable citizens to private water and broadband companies.
Oh, wow. So the companies literally aren't allowed to know who needs the help unless the customer raises their hand first.
That's the reality. The current system places the entire administrative burden on the person who is already experiencing maximum financial stress.
That's wild.
Right. The individual has to realize they're in trouble, know that a highly specific industry term like social tariff even exists, navigate their provider's complex website, locate the application, securely upload proof, and then formally apply.
All while trying to keep the lights on and feed their family. The cognitive load required just to ask for help is staggering.
And when you look at that £7 billion debt figure, you have to realize that a substantial portion of that money is essentially phantom debt.
Wait, what do you mean by phantom debt?
Well, it's debt accumulated by millions of people who actually qualify for cheaper tariffs, but who are actively paying the higher standard rates purely because they are in the dark about available support. They are building up massive arrears on a price point they shouldn't even be subjected to in the first place.
That is incredibly frustrating to think about. You have people experiencing the daily anxiety of avoiding the mail because they know another red bill is in there, and the bill is mathematically higher than it legally needs to be.
Exactly.
This moves us from just knowing about the help to the actual friction of accessing it. Because let's say you do know you need help. 1/3 of customers say they do not find it easy to contact their broadband providers when things go wrong.
The communication pathways are riddled with friction, and we can actually measure the exact financial cost of that friction in the energy sector data. Customers who manage to navigate the system and get on a formal repayment plan owe, on average, £1,000 less than those who don't.
Wait, £1,000?
£1,000 less.
That is a massive difference. Getting through to a human being and making a plan literally saves you £1,000 of spiraling debt. But I don't fully understand the mechanics of that. Does a repayment plan just magically wipe away the balances, or what is actually happening under the hood there?
No, it doesn't wipe it away. What it does is it stops the compounding snowball effect of arrears.
Right.
When you miss a payment without an agreement in place, a cascade of automated penalties begins. The provider might add a late fee. Then, as the debt ages, they might pass it to an external collection agency.
And they add their own fees, right?
Exactly. They immediately tack on their own administrative and recovery fees. If the utility company has to apply to courts to install a prepayment meter, those legal costs get added to the customer's balance too.
So the debt isn't just the original energy you used. It's the original energy plus a mountain of administrative punishment.
Exactly. A formal repayment plan freezes that chaos. It halts the late fees, stops the external collection actions, and replaces random missed payments with a predictable, agreed-upon structure that the customer can actually afford.
Right, but to get that structure, you have to successfully communicate with your provider in the first place.
And there's the catch.
Here is where the irony gets really thick for me. Debt collectors often operate under the assumption that people in arrears are ignoring them, right? They assume the customer is actively avoiding responsibility.
Always.
But what if the customer tried to fix the problem weeks ago, but just couldn't get past an automated phone menu? The barrier isn't always an unwillingness to pay. Sometimes it's quite literally just terrible customer service.
Think about the mechanics of trying to resolve a complex billing issue through a legacy call center. You call a generic helpline. You are funneled through an interactive voice response system, an IVR, where you listen to 5 minutes of automated options.
Press 1 for billing, press 2 to be put on hold forever.
Exactly. You wait on hold for 40 minutes. You finally get transferred to a Tier 1 support agent.
And that Tier 1 agent usually doesn't even have the security clearance or the software permissions to authorize a specialized long-term payment plan or a social tariff.
They don't. So they have to transfer you to a specialized collections or vulnerability team, and then the line drops. Or you get put back in the queue. And what happens?
You just give up.
The customer gives up. Not because they don't want to pay, but because the psychological and temporal cost of navigating that specific bureaucracy is just too high.
Or, you finally get through and you have to explain your entire traumatic financial situation, the job loss, the medical issue, to 3 different strangers in a row because the departments don't share notes.
Which is humiliating. So a manageable temporary financial hiccup, maybe a delayed paycheck or an unexpected car repair, converts into a formal escalating debt simply because the communication route failed. The provider's own customer service friction creates the very debt their collection department later spends resources trying to recover.
Wow, and this directly ties into the reality of vulnerability, which the National Audit Office data highlights heavily. They're explicitly calling for regulators to strengthen support for consumers in vulnerable circumstances.
Yes, they are.
They're talking about requiring better data use and genuinely needs-based services. But how does a massive corporation actually define vulnerability?
Well, that's the problem. The concept of vulnerability in debt collection is often profoundly misunderstood by the very systems designed to detect it. Historically, creditors have relied on a reactive, trigger-based model.
Meaning they wait for you to come to them.
Right. They wait for a customer to call up and explicitly state they are in crisis, or they wait for a debt advice charity to contact them on the customer's behalf.
There's almost this expectation of what vulnerability is supposed to sound like. Like the system expects someone to be audibly distressed, crying, or frantic on the phone.
Yeah, call center agents are often trained to listen for specific keywords or signs of distress, but vulnerability is not always visible, and it is rarely audible in the way those scripts expect.
Hmm.
A customer dealing with a severe physical disability, a chronic illness, a sudden drop in income, or severe mental health difficulties might sound completely calm and stoic on the phone.
They might just sound tired. Or they might be so completely overwhelmed by the executive dysfunction of depression that they are speaking in a monotone just to get through the phone call without breaking down.
Exactly. Relying on a customer to sound distressed or expecting them to actively volunteer their deeply personal struggles to a stranger whose primary job is to ask them for money is a fundamentally flawed collection strategy.
Yep, that makes sense.
People feel immense shame around debt. They are not going to eagerly disclose that they skip meals just to afford their kids' school shoes.
I am confused about the practical application of this, though. If the person on the phone sounds completely fine but is actually drowning financially, how is the utility company supposed to know? Are they supposed to just guess?
No, not guess. It requires a proactive shift in how companies use the data they already have. Affordability checks and signposting must come before applying pressure. Currently, the timeline is totally backwards.
Oh, so.
A payment is missed, the automated system sends a warning letter, then a red letter, then a threat of disconnection or debt collection. And only at the very end of that terrifying funnel does a specialized agent ask, wait, can you actually afford this?
By which point the customer's trust is completely shattered, and they've probably stopped opening the mail entirely.
Right. Pressure applied blindly to a vulnerable person increases distress and ruins engagement. The customer goes into fight or flight mode, they block the phone numbers. But if regulators enforce proactive data use, companies could see the behavioral patterns in their own ledgers.
Oh, like looking at their payment history.
Exactly. A consistently late payment that is always exactly 2 weeks behind, a sudden dramatic drop in water usage, a history of partial payments, these are data points that suggest a struggle long before someone defaults entirely.
So instead of the automated system triggering a threat letter, the system could trigger a supportive intervention.
Yes. The company reaches out and says, hey, we noticed your payment patterns changed. Did you know you might be eligible for this cheaper tariff? You intervene with support before the debt balloons, rather than waiting for the customer to hit rock bottom and call you in tears.
Let's pull all of this together and look at what it means for you, the listener, trying to understand the macroeconomic picture here. We started with this £7 billion figure, and we've unpacked the mechanics of how it gets that high.
Mm-hmm.
This isn't about reckless spending or people buying televisions they can't afford. This is about individuals sitting at their kitchen tables, choosing whether to pay the water bill or the energy bill, and avoiding the mail because the system makes it too cognitively exhausting to ask for help.
And for the broader debt landscape, the mandate is incredibly clear. The focus for creditors is moving permanently toward early intervention and fair treatment. The data proves, mathematically, that poor collection practices actually make repayment less likely.
Because it just piles on more debt they can't pay.
Right. When you alienate a customer with punitive fees and impossible call center labyrinths, you don't recover the debt. You just guarantee a total write-off down the line.
It's a complete paradigm shift for the industry. You have to treat the human being first to ever hope to balance the spreadsheet. You have to understand that in the realm of essential utilities, the customer is not a counterparty in a financial trade. They are a citizen requiring a basic service.
And if the utility companies continued treating essential arrears like credit card defaults, that $7 billion will only continue to climb. The mechanics of the recovery have to match the mechanics of the debt.
Which leaves us with a really compelling concept for you to chew on as we wrap up today. We know realistic repayment plans work. We know early engagement lowers arrears and saves these companies millions in write-offs. So, should utility providers stop looking at debt collection as a recovery operation altogether? If a customer misses a payment, should the system skip the red letters entirely and automatically trigger an affordability safety net? Because if the goal is truly to keep the lights on and the water running, maybe the very concept of collections belongs in the past.